What's up, y'all? It's your boy Kairos, and today I'm bringing you the definitive guide for Arms Warrior in the War Within for Season 1 for the PvP season. And something I want to get right out of the way: if you're playing Slayer, play Mastery. If you're playing Colossus, run Haste. How Slayer works with Haste, without Haste, is you get more execute procs, and they proc fast enough in between your overpowers, and you're also buffing your Mortal Strikes to hit for 1,000,000. Slayer is absolutely. I mean, it's literally named Slayer. It's literally slaying everything. Even with Fury, it's out of this world with what it does with your passives, where you can run Mastery as Fury and not really need the haste. You can run the Enrage that increases your movement speed by 10% and your haste by 15% and run Frenzy, so that's a total of 23. So at least it doesn't feel entirely horribly slow with the season, which I think will result in about 30% haste because you're going to be running the haste trinket anyway. Um, for the secondary stats for the proc chance on your main stat. But I want to kind of explain Slayer, why it's going to work with Mastery, and why Colossus can work with Mastery, and why it feels awkward, and why it sort of feels like it can't. Anyway, we're going to get into this. So there's a few things with Slayer. You get better execute proc chances. Well, that already clears up half of your downtime with your spec. So to kind of just bring it into context, I am running Skull Splitter. You can do something like this. There's a lot of options with arms. Of course, I'm not running Massacre. I'm not running that at all. You could even do something like, let's say, what's a good one? Something like this. Let's be real, 10% of the rate spent is refunded. Not that great, and Slayer executes already hitting insanely hard. Um, what's another one that you could do? You could do something like this, so you have a lot of uptime and damage. This actually would make Slayer actually hit like a train, because this also, your Mortal Strike and Cleaves against enemies above 30% health have a high chance to apply Fatal Mark, which does about 200k on the tooltip. I'm sure in PvP it'll be higher, but Arms actually has some talents you can play around with, which is actually kind of a refresher. So I'm gonna do this. I'm not gonna run execute here. I'm gonna show you how this rotation feels. Okay, so as far as stats, I'm gonna attack this dummy, get my stats increased. I have 7% haste. I have 26% mastery, 27% verse, 10% crit, because I'm obviously in battle stance. We have a little more crit as arms, so it gives us about 10% crit. So 10% crit plus the availability of also having our crit chance off our executes hit for more off of this. You heal for 15%. Just a little sustain, makes arms a little tankier. Marked for execution increases the critical strike chance and critical strike damage of your next execute on the target by 15%. Every 3 Slayer strikes, you gain sudden death. Using sudden death accelerates your next blade storm, striking 1 additional time. Max 3 blade storm's total duration is unchanged. Really good talent. You can get 3 stacks of it, and that basically all of that applies and goes into 45, which is also where this talent comes into play. Impale. Critical strike damage of your abilities is increased by 10%, which is basically just a flat damage increase. Overpower deals 15% damage, has a 10% increased critical strike chance, and deals 10% increased critical strike damage. Basically, we're just running everything to increase our mastery. And we do lose out on this. So the reason why I'm not selecting these talents is for obvious reasons. Activating Avatar grants 8 seconds of sweeping strike, and while Avatar is active, the cooldown of Cleave is reduced by 1.5 seconds. Well, we don't use cleave. We PvP. Activating Avatar grants 6 seconds of recklessness. Honestly, this is also not a great talent, and the reason is instead of working around your Colossus Smash and your Avatar, now it's if this worked around your Colossus Smash, this would be such a much better talent, or it was baked in together, it would be a lot stronger. Warlord's Torment, of course, you could still achieve a crazy one shot with this potentially, but you're still running the chance of we don't have a lot of secondary stats and we don't have a lot of things that benefit our crit in that way yet because we don't have just the raw secondary stats. This is the beginning of the expansion. All haste values are relatively low, and most classes are relatively playing somewhat slow compared to what they are middle of the expansion to the end, where Fury has, you know, like 60% haste, 60% mastery, 30% uh, versatility, and 25% crit as an example. And arms looks roughly the same way, right? So with arms, with the Slayer portion of it, basically the way your rotation is going to look is you're going to slow the target with Hamstring, Mortal Strike, Thunderclap, and then whatever filler while you're waiting. Okay, you don't have the rage for the Thunderclap. You're using, let's say you're using Overpower. Now you have the rage. Now you're using Thunderclap. And then you rinse and repeat. You get a proc of Mortal Strike. You're going to proc that Mortal Strike off of your Exhilarating Blows. Or, I mean, your Battle Lord, rather. Overpower has a 35% chance to reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike and generate 10 rage. Mortal Strike's already dealing a ton of your damage anyway, so you're going to want to press it. I would say putting Mortal Strike on cooldown is going to be your best friend. It's going to give you more damage, and if they cut away from you, they at least still have that Mortal Strike effect, and instead of it falling off in 5 seconds, it's going to stay on. So when you reach them again, they're not getting healed for free, and they still have a Mortal Strike effect on them. So essentially, you're burning them by having that up as much as possible, by using your Mortal Strike on cooldown. Of course, with low haste value, that is a little bit slower, but I want to kind of go into why this is strong and why I've actually found success with this. I was actually going to run a Mastery set and a haste set, and I found with Slayer, Mastery is working exceptionally well, and I did test it on the beta about 2 weeks ago, and this is kind of what I found with the Mastery build. You can still use Demolish, or Colossus rather, and with Slayer it feels actually incredible to use all Mastery with Slayer, because you get increased chance to get your sudden deaths, which is a really good one. So that gets rid of, you know, having to wait. It kind of speeds up your spec a little bit, meaning you have something to press in the meantime. But I'm going to kind of go into this. So I've got my burst macro. It's all layered in with my thunderous words, everything else, and sweeping strikes is its own button. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to start on this dummy. I'm just going to start bursting right away. Yeah, we got the debuff up on him. Now we're going to use everything. We're going to use our Skull Splitter. We're going to get Rage. We still have Sweeping Strikes up. We have everything else. You want to get a Tactician proc. We're just going to assume that they have full health, right? Okay, we got a proc of Mortal Strike. Okay, we don't have another strike. Another Mortal Strike proc. Okay, let's say they're in execute range. Okay, now we just hit them again. We're bursting again already. We're going to get max rage. We put our sudden death on cooldown. We're going to use it again. We're going to use that overpower. Going to use Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike. Okay, we're waiting. We don't have any procs. And this does feel rather smooth. So it doesn't feel terrible. And I know Mortal Strike is reapplying rend on the target. But even then, it doesn't feel that bad, because people are going to want to run away from you anyway. Skull Splitter is all about just setting it up and having extra bleed damage. Okay, we have full cooldowns. Or not full cooldowns, but relatively close. Okay, we have a sudden death proc. Mortal Strike. Overpower. Another sudden death. We got another sudden death proc on our cooldown. We don't have Thunderclap yet. Always keep Colossus or Mortal Strike on cooldown. This is literally the whole rotation where you're just spending Rage endlessly as much as you can. You have Mortal Strike. We're always going to put Mortal Strike ahead of everything else because when we Mortal Strike again, we're buffing Mortal Strike traumatically where, yes, I am hitting 3 targets, but even in, let's say, if I'm fighting a melee cleave and they're hitting my Warlock, let's say, I'm still going to be able to hit both of them with all of my damage. You know, our Sweeping Strikes is going to fall off. Let's just say we want a bunch of bleed damage. No, we're going to Blade Storm, right? We're still holding a million DPS. Our Mortal Strikes are huge. Our Overpowers are huge. Our Deep Wounds are huge. Our Thunderous Words are huge. Our Rends are huge. And our Executes are huge. And Reap the Storm is baked right in with Mortal Strike, which is here. Mortal Strike and Cleave have a 20% chance to let loose and deal X amount of damage. That damage is only higher because when you have Deep Wounds on the target, it's increased by X amount, by 20%. So I'm going to go into basically, there's how that rotation works with the Mastery with Slayer and using Mortal Strike on cooldown, using your Overpowers and everything else for whatever. Sorry, I had to sneeze. I'm going to go into Colossus and kind of explain why it has its goods and its bads. Now, it is good in some ways. I'm going to give you an example why I don't think it's good in rated PvP unless if it's for a few different niches. And those niches are Cleaves, Death Knights, Hunters, any class that has any movement ability, Monk Roll, Warrior Charge, Port, Blink, Shaman, where they fly like 15 yards away from you, Gust of Wind, things like that. They can use it on that, right? So I'm going to read this ability to you. Unleash a series of precise and powerful strikes against your target, dealing X amount of damage to it and dealing X amount of damage to all enemies within 8 yards. Deals reduced damage beyond a target. So basically, it's a, a Blade Storm. But instead of AoEing like a Blade Storm would, it does less damage to secondary targets. And while demolishing, you take 10% less damage and are immune to stuns, knockbacks, and forced movement effects. That's the one thing I do like about this ability. You can block, parry, dodge, and use certain defensive abilities while channeling Demolish. The only thing I don't like about it is most classes can get away from it. Warrior Heroic Leap, Monk Roll, Monk Port, Blink, Warlock Demonic Circle. So you basically have to pair this with a stun every time. Otherwise, this is not going to work at all, which isn't a bad thing. There are a few things in this talent tree I do like. Now, I do have my grips with this because you do have to pair it with the stun. So now instead of using your Stormbolt or your Shockwave to peel, now you have to use it specifically for this ability, which isn't bad because you can get Rumbling Earth on a really short cooldown. So I'm going to, or Shockwave on a really short cooldown. It's on a 35-second cooldown because of this trait. Now, I'm going to go into it. Increases the critical damage of your abilities by 10%, and the amount of damage blocked by your critical blocks is increased by 20. That's a prot thing, I guess. Colossus Might increases the damage of your rend and deep wounds by 2% per stack, so it synergizes with Skull Splitter and basically the whole bleed build. Really good, really like that. Mortal Strike and Cleave damage increased by 15%. We'd like to see that. Colossus Smash now stacks up to 10 times. If you would gain a stack of Colossus Might and are at max stacks, the cooldown of Demolish is reduced by 2 seconds. Enemies affected by Demolish take up to 10% more damage from you and deal up to 5% damage to you for 10 seconds based on the number of stacks of Colossus Smash consumed by Demolish. Colossus Smash increases damage dealt by your next Demolish by 10%, stacking up to 10 times. So this is kind of like a one-shot, like, spec, which does sound good, except you're always going to have to use it to... basically, it feels like a Frosty K and Dragonflight. Basically, it's like you want to trinket and get away from this every time, which does have a lot of implications, but as far as fitting into your your rotation, it just feels a little weird. But I think overall it works really significantly. It's just the only issue that I see is you're gonna have to drop a talent point and do something like this, is where you can have the extra 5% strength and basically pre-piercing Howl, stun him, and then use it. Because no matter what, somebody's going to have to get away from this, because you can kill somebody with it. It actually does hit significantly hard, especially into Clothies. Which is something, but there is a little, like, it just mechanically feels weird to me, specific. Like, it just doesn't feel good to press it, and then it does, and then it doesn't. Like, you always have to, like, it's going to be terrible in the mages, obviously, because mages are going to be able to blink through it. You're not going to be able to set it up with a stun. And the major reason is they have a 10-second blink. I feel like most mages are kind of starting to see that for what it is and how strong that is. So if you're queuing into mages, this basically locks it out. Hell, even hunters, if they can get if they can dodge your stun with your shockwave, because you're gonna want to use your storm bolt on the healer. Who would have thunk? But that's one thing. This spec does have a lot of potential by just eventually people aren't going to be able to live through it. And you can run haste with this, so you're basically just this unstoppable juggernaut. And I think you'll need to run haste with this a lot more. I found that haste feels a lot better. But here's how I'm kind of seeing this. Okay, so we're going to make some assumptions. This is the enemy team. We're running all mastery, obviously. Our rotation feels really crappy. We're going to pre-use everything. We're going to get everything up on him. And now we're going to stun. Now we're going to demolish. And demolish does hit exceptionally hard. Demolish damage increased by 100%. Let's see what kind of damage we can get with the next one, because it's going to overlap, right? So it is a little bit better. You see what it can do. And honestly, Arms doesn't feel unplayable with Mastery with Demolish. It just doesn't always feel like it can be the best. Okay, we still have Colossus Smash on the trigger. I want to see what it can do. Boom. Demolish is still incredible. It is absolutely hitting hard, but there are some classes I would not run it into. I would prefer to run Slayer and absolutely have way more sustained damage. Now, there are some modifiers on this talent tree that are actually hitting hard, but it does feel a little bit weird. This seems to be more of a PvP talent tree for Arms rather than Slayer. In which ways, in some ways it's good, in some ways are bad. It does make you immune to CC, just like Bladestorm. It's basically just a bastardized Bladestorm where you're channeling it. It's basically like an old Slam, like back in like Wrath of the Lich King or something. But this is probably one of my favorite talents from this tree right here. Shockwave also knocks an enemy into the air, and its cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. This talent is going to be incredible into a lot of different comps. So you could do something like, we're going to lose a talent. I can do something like this, right? I could absolutely run this, because now my damage is so much higher. And if I'm already stacking on them and I'm immune to CC, let's say they're already slowed, right? We're going to slow them down with our Thunderclap. We're going to use our thing. We're going to use everything right here. And Demolish absolutely pumps. So That's obviously, it's going to be a lot less in PvP. Well, not a lot less, but you'll certainly get cooldowns with it. I think there's going to be a lot of synergy with Demolished, but to me it still feels weird just because of how all of it works, if that makes sense. But I do like the fact that it increases your bleed damage, because you're already increasing your bleed damage with Thunderous Words and increasing that said damage with Skull Splitter by making it tick 100% faster, and there is some availability to just run pure mastery and just do way more damage. I know some people are always going to go haste is better, but honestly it's early season and we're already getting the 10% haste from our Colossus Smash. So, you know, what are we in PvP right now as far as haste? 7%. So for me, I'll be at 17% haste when I'm bursting. Not a bad gig for me, but I'm feeling like, as far as mastery, Slayer 100% mastery with this build, haste or mastery works. Crit obviously useless. I think the tier sets may be in PvP. I'm not sure yet. That might see some play, but I'm feeling mastery is the best thing. Colossus Smash and cooldown, just absolutely everything to be annoying. And I'm thinking, as far as which one's better, I think it depends on the situation. I think it depends on the comp. I think it depends on a few things. Demolish does have some really crazy potential to kill, but so does Slayer, and Slayer just buffs your execute damage, where it's out of this world crazy. So pick your poison. I think Demolish, yes, it does increase your overall damage, but Slayer just adds so many different things to your toolkit with Wreath the Storm, with Slayer Strikes, and makes your executes already hit so much harder, and your Mortal Strikes, where this, yes, you do get some improvement with the base talent here, but I'm not sure how it all align yet. But this is kind of like the meme one-shot arms build. I'm kind of seeing it for what it is. Obviously, if you're playing with the Frost TK, it always depends on what comp. But Slayer overall, probably going to be the best. I would say solo shuffle, twos sort of spec, and Colossus might just be the better threes comp, especially if there's going to be a lot of melee cleaves or melee caster cleaves. And it can actually be clutch to where you can completely immune a go and use Die by the Sword. So Colossus does have its situational awareness if you can use that to your advantage, but then you do lose some potential with that one-shot potential. But maybe you're playing with, let's say, a Unholy DK, and you don't really need the damage from Demolish to be as big as you need it to be. It's kind of like a risk-reward system which you can play with, which I kind of do like, but at the same time I'm not really sure how it's going to go. Of course, there will always be other changes, but I would have to say, even for arms, the hero talents are looking really good, because one gives you a one shot, one gives you a huge sustain, and it gives you some pretty good just overall damage. But I'm not sure. I can't say which one is definitively better. I'm sure there'll be some changes, but who knows? I mean, it's just the Slayer tree is just huge, non-stop pressure, and the Colossus is kind of the one-shot spec. It does give you some sustain options, gives you some peel options with Shockwave. It makes you more annoying. Colossus annoying, Slayer damage. It's kind of what I'm seeing it as. So Demolish, you're immune to CC. Slayer, you just do a ton of just big damage the entire game. People are going to struggle to get you off as far as the damage, and you can just stick on the target and absolutely pump. Wreath the Storm can hit for 300k. Your damage is non-stop. Colossus is kind of the same thing. Arms is just kind of where that's at. And arms damage has always been kind of low at the start of the expansion, unless if it's just hitting like a truck, which at the start of the expansion always seems like arms is. But it's kind of a weird expansion because Fury is viable, which is a different thing for a lot of people. But I'm gonna make another video basically explaining which spec is better. Arms and Fury, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their obvious, kind of what's going to be better going into certain comps, what's going to work well with other things. I'm going to make kind of a little tier list, just kind of just see where everything goes. And yeah, and you guys have a good one, and I hope you guys enjoyed the guide, and go ahead and like and subscribe. Alright, see ya.